Hello, 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 and welcome back for another amazing year of the IBS Freedom Podcast. Holy crap, 2024, we made it. That's the crowd going wild and a wolf howling in the background, question mark?
Yes.
We'll run with it. We'll run. I mean, the wolf is excited too. We made it. We did it. Yay, another one in the books. But, I think that all of our listeners probably have the exact same New Year aspiration for themselves for 2024. And I think that they want to be healthy. They want to be healed. And so, my darling Amy, I bring to you today's topic, which is, what does that look like? Like, what does it mean to be healed, to be done with this stupid healing journey, as it's called? Like, what can they expect on the other side of this journey?
It's such a juicy question because there's a lot of dirt.
And this was listener submitted, by the way.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me this idea on Instagram, and I just thought it was such a great idea. So, continue.
I mean, probably the simplest answer that I'd have would be, or at least in my mind, everyone might have a different perception of what that means exactly for them. But from my standpoint, conquering IBS involves where it fades into the background and you can pursue your passions, your goals. You can basically live up to your full potential, whatever that is, without symptoms holding you back. And again, that doesn't mean you never have a symptom ever again, but it means that it's not consuming you in a way. It's not getting in the way of goals. Your
life doesn't revolve around it.
Right. Your life doesn't revolve around it. So from my standpoint, it's when things just fade into the background and you can focus on the things that you want to focus on and not have to focus much attention on symptoms and IBS in general would be sort of my simple answer. And we can carve out what that means. And it probably is a good question to think about as you move through a journey. You know, what does that look like for you? What endpoints make sense for your journey, which might not make sense for someone else's journey. And that's something to really consider because I do think healing for one person might mean, oh, maybe I do have to take a supplement long-term where someone else doesn't have to take that long-term. But both feel really good and feel like they can still pursue their goals either way. Or so again, there's little nuancy things in terms of each individual case, but overall, it should be about you being able to live your life how you want to live it, and these symptoms just sort of drift off into the background and they're not anywhere near the forefront of your mind.
Yeah. And I think that's a great one to start with because there's two pieces to that, I think. It becomes much easier to live your life when you don't have these symptoms, right? If you're not so bloated that you look 9 months pregnant, if you're not having diarrhea all the time or constipation all the time, or, bloating or feeling miserable when you eat certain foods, you're able to go out again. So there's this element of like the healing brings this about. Like healing your gut makes it easier to live your life. But there's also the flippity flip to that we have talked about a lot, which is oftentimes you have to start engaging with your life and living your life again in order to facilitate the healing. So this is a great thing to bring up in the beginning of the episode. Like, we're not necessarily recommending that you wait until your gut is healed to feel like you can live your life again. That's actually quite the opposite of what we preach here on this podcast. And one framework that I shared at some point previously that came about in like a business coaching space is the difference between have, do, be versus be, do, have. So much of the time, whether it's in business or in a health-related kind of thing like this, we tend to think in terms of when I have this, I will be this and I will do this, right? When I have symptom relief or when I have my diet back to normal or whatever, then I will do these things. Like I will go and engage with my life, hang out with my friends, do these things, and then I will be happy, right? Have,
Yeah.
do, be. But very frequently, we'll find that we have to flip that script if we actually want to feel better. And it becomes this, okay, you need to learn how to be a person who is happy and loves their life. And then you need to act on that. Like you need to start engaging with your life, engaging with your friends and family again, experimenting with some foods, trying to live. And then you will find that you have the symptomatic relief that you want.
Yeah, and I love the be, do, have. I love that analogy. I think that's a great that creates a great mental image in my head. I think you're bringing up in that analogy. One thing to also consider is that typically, I think people that have IBS tend to have more rigid thinking, or they can. So meaning, oh, if I'm having any symptom, then I can't do the things I want to do. Or I think you can get stuck in that mindset of similar to what you were talking about, unless the symptoms resolve, then I can do this thing. And that doesn't mean that you're always going to feel 100% when you go and you go out to eat and maybe you feel a little bit not great, but you were able to connect and still somewhat enjoy the experience. Maybe it's not as much as if you could order anything off the menu and have no symptoms. Nikki showing us her beautiful shirt. But yeah, I mean, I think the rigid thinking about how you view symptoms and how you view living your life can be problematic in recovery from IBS, because a lot of times it can be a little bit of an excuse, like, oh, I have symptoms, I can't go do this thing because I have symptoms. And it's like, well, you can do that thing and maybe you don't enjoy it quite as much as if you weren't having symptoms, but you'd still enjoy it some. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, is try not to get super rigid in how you're viewing your thinking. Try to push yourself to continue engaging, even if it's uncomfortable. And that's within reason. Obviously, if you're having a major flare up or something, then it makes sense to stay home. And if you're really, truly not going to enjoy the experience at all, definitely stay home. So I think there's still a line there, but it is really important to push yourself a little outside your comfort zone at times to continue engaging with your life, so that, again, you're still able to enjoy it. Because I still think you can enjoy your life when you have IBS. Now, does taking care of the IBS certainly help you enjoy your life more? Absolutely. I think that we can all agree on that. But this idea that if you have IBS, you have zero enjoyment, or like, I'm going to kind of steer away from enjoyment until the IBS is gone, is not the best avenue. It's not that black and white. So that's just something I wanted to throw out there to think a little bit about, because I know I got stuck in that thinking at times of like, oh, I'll date when my IBS is better, or I'll pursue some different career things once the IBS resolves. And like, I'll put
basketball.
things on, or play basketball. We've talked about that. I'll put all these things on hold until, but then that just keeps you stuck, because you need joy in your life to overcome IBS. And so yeah, just be careful of some rigid thinking that you might get stuck in. And I empathize for that, because I definitely struggled to figure out some flexibility in how I was maneuvering through recovery from IBS and pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. But yeah, just something to consider. And I think it's relevant to this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we've had conversations in this vein before. It's kind of in that same sphere as like OCD kind of stuff too. And I've even gotten to a point with this idea of different things that are all kind of mishmash together because they are connected. So more rigid thinking, black and white, this or that, a kind of OCD, obsessive sort of tendencies sometimes, a great deal of health anxiety and like phobias and fears, and then hypervigilance, like paying way too much mind to little things. Like, oh my God, I felt one gas bubble. And kind of catastrophizing little things. And all of these things are different, but they're all sort of mushed together in the same kind of arena. And it's very common within the IBS space in particular. And we have talked about this privately. There's even been some studies that compare IBS versus IBD. And IBS is unique in this way. Even other people who have every reason in the world to have bloating and tummy pain and diarrhea and constipation and all the same symptoms don't tend to share this degree of rigidity and OCD and anxiety and disordered eating and this sort of ball of wax that the IBS world does. So this is not just our clinical observation. This is actually something that has been tossed around in research at least a little bit up until this point.
Yeah. And I think it's just such an important part of recovery to be able to have symptoms come up and allow that discomfort to be there without trying to change anything, resist or avoid the symptoms, just move through it and get on the other side of it. Because everybody is going to have symptoms at some point. If you eat something a little bit too old or just that didn't agree with you or too much, like a little bit of extra, I don't know, it's holidays, like you eat a little bit too much, like anything can really throw things off a little bit, or you don't sleep or other factors outside of the food realm. So
we're only human.
Right. And I think the PTSD type response is what can really like hook people back into some of the brain gut axis weirdness and can keep you locked in a very IBS like state. So I think the more people can come to terms with, oh yeah, like I'm going to have probably a symptom or two. That doesn't mean that my IBS is back, but it's super normal for your brain to say, oh man, is your IBS back? Because it's trying to protect you, and you just have to kind of acknowledge that you have those fears and try to move through them the best you can.
Well, it's almost like you're telling your nervous system, thank you. I see what you're trying to do for me here. You're trying to protect me. However, I'm just going to, move this direction. I'm going to move on anyway. And,
right.
I have a couple of examples for this twofold. So one, I think I've mentioned her before, but I remember I worked with a patient years ago. And one of the things that she kind of like brought to the table, so to speak, when she started working with me was that she had months and months worth of tracking her bowel movements in like a smartphone app for BMs. And she could show me page after page after page for like 4 to 6 months worth of data. Look, diarrhea every single day. You could see it's like in the blue all day, every day. And I was like, all right, that's good data collection. I could appreciate that as a science nerd. And then I made pretty quick work of her. Like I think within even like 2 or 3 appointments, she was feeling a lot better. Her diarrhea was resolved and we were broadening her diet and she was doing pretty well. And then as the next few sessions kind of went by, it came out that she was still tracking her bowel movements in this app. And she had normal bowel movements for like 2 months. And I brought up, I was like, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. Don't you think you're like over this now? And she said it in her mind at the time, she said, I had diarrhea for 6 months prior to working with you and resolving it. So in my head, I want to see 6 months worth of perfect poops on this app. And that's when I'm going to believe it. I was like, wow, that's probably overkill. I'd be willing to say, yay, we did it. Hooray. Pat ourselves on the back after even like a couple weeks of normal BMs. But it does beg the question. Luckily, this did not happen with her and she's still doing great. She since had a baby. Like she's fantastic. But imagine that scenario. Well, what if she did have diarrhea for one day at like the 4-month mark? Right? Would that be enough to mess with this algorithm in her brain? Because her brain, for whatever reason, told her, you had the symptom for 6 months, so you're not going to be in the clear until you have an equal amount of time without that symptom.
Right.
Well, what if she had diarrhea at the 4-month mark for a day? Would she flip shit and think that she was back in IBS land? And would that catapult her into a vagus nerve, gut-brain axis snare? And I think one way to kind of conceptualize what you're talking about here is, does the response, does the intensity of the response make sense given the intensity of the thing, right? So if you have, and I'm going to get graphic for like 5 seconds here, so just deal. If you had copious amounts of bloody diarrhea, you have my full permission to panic and like immediately run to the doctor, get a colonoscopy, like holy shit, right? That's a big deal. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, if you get a little bit bloated or a little bit of indigestion, or you have like one kind of loose bowel movement, does it necessitate totally panicking and going overboard and thinking like, I need antimicrobials, I need to do low FODMAP, I need to do elemental? And it sounds like we're exaggerating, but this is the sort of stuff that our clients and our patients and students have done before. Like, it could be that simple that you get a teensy bit bloated one day and people are ricocheting back to thinking they need to do the elemental diet.
Well, and I think that that's part of getting sucked up in the IBS vicious cycle. It's how you manage some of the quirky things that the brain does, which is, it's like an overprotective parent in the scenario. It's saying, oh, you can't go out past 9. There could be, drunk drivers out or anything that could hurt you. Again, it's being super protective to the point that it's preventing you from moving forward with goals or living your life in the scenario of a teen and like an overprotective parent. And again, like it's not like the parent, it wouldn't be good for the parent to be like, oh, you can go out at all hours for forever, do whatever you want. But at the same time, if the parent is very overprotective to where the teen can never learn things and never kind of experiment, not that I'm saying experiment with drugs or anything, but like, interact
I get
with
what
people.
you mean though.
Right.
It's like your nervous system needs to protect you and have a response when it's appropriate. So again, if you have copious amounts of bloody diarrhea, by all means, nervous system, please protect this person and make them do the right thing and go to the ER. But overprotective and hypervigilant is not serving you either, because that's when you get tangled up in this like gut-brain axis, vagus nerve, poor motility, weird digestion, like kind of stuff. And that is what IBS appears to be right now based on current research. It appears that IBS is a disorder of the gut-brain axis first and foremost, and most likely dysbiosis as well.
Well, it launches you into that fight or flight state and can keep you stuck there, focusing on symptoms. And you almost have to tell the overprotective scenario in that instance, hey, like, mom, it's cool. Like, I can go out with my friends and, I can move forward with my goals. I can live in New York City or whatever it is, that would scare a parent.
I'll try to be safe, but
Right.
Yeah.
It's that scenario. You almost need to counter that voice in your head and that fear in your head, and just kind of be like, hey, I hear ya, I see that you're there. I'm acknowledging. All right.
Finger guns.
Because I think at the same time, you don't want to be like, I'm not hearing that. Like, just totally try to, prevent thoughts from coming up. That creates some weirdness too. I think you can acknowledge that it's present. Some mindfulness-based studies have shown that there seems to be a lot of help with being able to be in the present moment, and if thoughts and things come up, try to view them with curiosity without tons of judgment. It kind of lowers the reaction and the threat level that some of the thoughts come with. So again, I think that it's such a critical part to moving forward is this idea of how do you manage when something does come up, and having maybe some strategies to help you move through that. And probably the biggest strategy is to do nothing, which is hard for someone maybe with IBS that has a little bit more of a propensity to hypervigilance and maybe anxiety. So that's just, again, I think another key point.
And I'll share a phrase, and I think we have shared this before, but I'll repeat it again. I think maybe the magic phrase is going to be, that's interesting. And that's,
yeah.
And then again, you are curious. It's not to say that you want to be oblivious and ignore, again, if you have bloody diarrhea, please don't ignore that and don't be a dingleberry, like go actually get it taken care of. But, again, it's like, does the degree of the response match the degree of the thing? And yeah, it's a very PTSD-ish kind of thing that comes up. I'll throw out there too, like, okay, couplefold. Dietitian in the house. Would you agree with me that there are some foods that are intrinsically a bit more gassy for everybody, regardless of IBS, dysbiosis, whatever?
Yes.
So the thing that comes to my mind immediately is beans, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot. The more you toot, the better you feel. Now you're ready for another meal. I mean, we came up with that song. Not we, like somebody somewhere. Yeah. Somebody somewhere.
I want you to die on that hill and say, no, I was the OG
the originator.
person that came up with that song.
I don't know if that would track, because I'm sure that there are people quite a bit older than me who are familiar with that song, and they would call bullshit on me. But
that's true.
Wouldn't
it be a story though? The originator of that song then becoming someone that works with people with IBS. What a story!
It would be a legacy for sure. Or maybe people would just think that I'm way older than I look. Like maybe I'm 75 and I just look really good for my age. Who knows? But the point being is that there are some foods that are sort of just known to be a little bit gassy, and beans is a great example of this. So I don't care how much you have healed your gut. If you go apeshit and eat a ton of refried beans at a Mexican restaurant or whatever, you're probably going to be a little bit gassy. Or similarly, if you overeat, you're probably going to feel bloated and gross. Like we had one of these, my in-laws come to visit around Halloween every year for about 10 days. And we go out to eat at restaurants a bit more than we normally would when they're in town. And I kid you not, the one night we go to a Mexican restaurant and, they bring you the chips and the salsa, and you're like legally mandated to eat the chips and salsa, right? So we gorged ourselves on chips and salsa, and then I got like a fajita sizzle platter. My in-laws got big old margaritas. We all waddled out of that restaurant. And we were so horribly overfull. We were all dumb, and we just ate way too many chips and salsa. And we went home and we just like vegged on the couch and moaned. We're like, oh. And I think I made some ginger tummy tea for my mother-in-law and I, and we just kind of lay there. Another night, we went out to a different restaurant. I don't remember which one. Actually, no, it was Texas Roadhouse. Fun mind experiment. Logging in Chronometer when you eat something like Texas Roadhouse. The number of calories in these items that are all pre-programmed into Chronometer already, by the way. The number of calories was nothing short of horrific. And I'm pretty cool. Like, I don't mind when I eat more calories and I overshoot the mark. I don't worry about that. But even I was like, whoa. So We ate a bunch at very calorically dense food at Texas Roadhouse. And I'm looking at a chronometer and I'm thinking about 2 nights prior when we overstuffed ourselves at the Mexican place and how bad we felt. So after we went to dinner at Texas Roadhouse, I said, hey guys, why don't we go walk around Target? We have a couple things we can get on our list. And also we'll move around and not stagnate as much.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, we felt a bit better and probably digested our food a bit better. But I would not say that I have IBS or SIBO or candida or leaky gut or any sort of gut complaint. That's just, I'm a human and I ate too much and I was super full and uncomfortable. And then the next time I ate a lot of calories in one sitting, I smartened up and I moved around and we walked around Target instead.
You know, it cracks me up. It reminds me of, I think it was last Christmas. It might have been the Christmas before, but Armand's family, his stepmom makes a very Persian dish called ashk. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's like a Persian bean soup. And, you know, I don't think everyone in the family is used to eating a ton of beans. So, of course, everyone eats this soup the night before. And I probably eat more beans than most of them. So I might have was a little bit gassy, but didn't really notice. But the next day, they're all like, oh, like they're all struggling from so much beans in this bean soup. It was hilarious because every single one was like, oh, that was just too many beans than what we're used to. And it is a good reminder that now these people aren't thinking all of a sudden like, oh, I have IBS, and because they don't have a history. So it's just like, oh, I ate something gassy. That's immediately where their brain goes. But, you know.
And their system wasn't used to it. It was more beans than they had eaten in the previous weeks or months. Yeah, I mean, I think that's logical.
But yeah, I think when you have this baggage, this past history of IBS, so to speak, it's easy for your brain to be like, well, it could be the beans you ate, or it could be IBS coming back.
You fed the SIBO and it's back.
Right. So it's really tricky when those seeds of doubt get planted to be able to move forward and not get sucked in. But that's a really important part of the process. And I do think that when we're talking about recovery, this is like to me, it's very analogous to like the OCD recovery, which again, the goal, and this goes back to what we've been talking about, the goal to never have a symptom is not the goal that I would go after. Just like for me, the goal for OCD and anxiety is not to never have like an intrusive thought or anxiety again. That's not realistic. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. Everybody has bloating at times. Everybody has these things. I think the goal should still always be like, what are you doing? If these symptoms were not there on the day to day, what would you be doing? Trying to incorporate some of the stuff while you're recovering, I think is important. Like what we were discussing earlier, like you have to be in this process. You can't just be totally idle until you get better. But, that's still as important as moving through the mindset piece when symptoms do come up. Having some endpoints or goals in mind to you that equate to recovery, I think is helpful. So, maybe that is, I want to get pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy. And that's a big goal. Maybe that could be something that ties into like what feels recovered to you. Maybe it's that you can just be more present with your family. It doesn't have to be like a huge thing, but I think if you can find some concrete things to kind of check in with each over time, like, oh, am I more engaged in my life versus less engaged in my life? More in my head about symptoms versus more engaged with my family or my goals. To me, again, that's the biggest indicator that you're on the right path, is that you're more engaged with goals and having like a few things, like even writing them down of what goals would sort of encompass recovery to you may be a helpful tool.
And I think you're kind of lightly tiptoeing around the be, do, have versus have, do, be thing again, in the sense that I think the goals that you come up with should largely be focused on your life and your experience and your actions and your behaviors versus making all of your goals symptomatic. So somebody with IBSD could have very reasonably the goals: no diarrhea, no bloating, flat tummy so I could fit into those jeans that I like, and be able to eat onion and garlic again. And those would be very reasonable goals, but it just kind of keeps you stuck in that, like, that mental space of focusing on the symptoms and like, I can't do anything until I achieve these things, versus that same person could have the goal of being able to go to their cousin's wedding in the summer and, you know, being able to eat at their favorite restaurant again, which happens to use onion and garlic in some of their dishes. And, you know, being able to start going to the gym again and like wake up early enough to go to the gym and get back into their workout routine. Like, I think that those goals are going to be a lot more useful and a lot happier to track and think about, as opposed to just hyper focusing on the diarrhea, the bloating, the whatever the symptom might be.
It keeps you in a hypervigilant state then. Like, you're on high alert of all your symptoms changing. And it's one reason why, I mean, there is a time and place where maybe I might track a particular symptom or we might gauge, but I usually don't like symptom tracking because it causes more hypervigilance and it causes more, I'm going to be super alert to any change. And that's already a problem in the IBS space. So I agree with you, focusing on goals that, again, are not necessarily gut symptom related. And I think all the goals that you mentioned are fulfilling. Like, granted, it would be great if you didn't have bloating, but I don't think that that's like inherently fulfilling. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like life enriching. Now, it could lead to some life enriching things, like if you had less symptoms. But like you said, I don't think it should be the focus. I think it can keep you stuck focusing on goals more broadly and, again, living your purpose and pursuing the things that are important to you and enjoying your life should probably be more of the focus when you're talking about goals of recovery than focusing all your energy on symptoms.
Yeah. Well, and because at the end of the day, too, you can be a person with normal bowel movements, no bloating, and theoretically able to eat anything you want. And you could still be hauled up in your room, a hermit, and have no life and be very unhappy.
Yeah.
Or, you know, conversely, you'd be surprised. I've met people where I'll get into casual conversations with them at like a meetup event or a trip or the beach. I am a yellow lab. I go up to people and I just make friends, especially on airplanes. If you ever sit next to me on an airplane, oh my God, we're going to be the best of friends. And I will talk your ear off if I think that you're receptive to that. But, you know, I've met people who are living their life and they're out and about and they're doing things. And then, and by the way, I have diarrhea like all the time. It's like, okay. So being free of symptoms does not guarantee that you're going to live a life worth living. And also, the presence of the symptoms does not intrinsically make it so that you can't do that. It's, but I think focusing on the things that actually matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Interaction, living your life, doing things you enjoy, doing things that fulfill you, fill your cup, so to speak, like living your best life. I think that's what actually matters. And that's going to be a better goal.
Yeah. Yeah, it does blow my mind sometimes hearing about people that, you know, have had diarrhea every day of their life and just are like, yeah, isn't that wild? Like, they're like totally, there is one girl, you know, when I started getting into the gut health space, she was sort of talking to me and was just like, yeah, I had no idea that I just like was having diarrhea. Like she just had no idea until more recently that that was probably not good.
Yeah.
But she was also very unbothered by it.
Yeah.
So again, it's so strange, and lived a very full life, had diarrhea every single day of your life. There could be probably some dysfunction there or some weirdness that could.
I'm sure there's something we could work with there.
Right. Exactly. So but yeah, it is kind of funny. I agree. I don't necessarily think people that would meet the criteria for IBS for sure sometimes are living very full lives and unbothered and are just
You would never know.
right.
Yeah. And similarly, I still remember this guy to this day. So I was in the student clinic. I was starting to do like clinic rotations for school. And, I went to chiropractic school. We were just supposed to get people in, talk to them about, oh, do you have back pain? Where does it hurt? Crack, crack, out you go. And I get this guy. He was a student. He was a student with the acupuncture program at my school. And he came in to get adjusted. And being the dweeb that I am, I asked him a handful of other questions like, oh, how's your tummy? How are your bowel movements? How's your nutrition? And just nonchalantly, he busts out with, well, I have diarrhea multiple times every single day. And I have for years. I was like, oh, okay, that's like something we could talk about quite a bit. And he pretty much just said like, nope, I don't even, like, I'm fine. I'm just here to get my neck cracked. I was like,
Right.
okay, cool, man. So I adjusted his neck and away he went, and he was happy as a clam. And similarly, I kid you not, 3 out of my 4 best friends in the whole wide world poop like once a week.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. And, all 3 of them, I have gently, but multiple times, I have mentioned, hey, like this is kind of what I do for work. If you ever want help with this, I'm totally happy to help. I'm here for you, but I'm also not going to I'm not going to push it on you. And none of the 3 of them have really approached me for help.
Yeah.
And they're going through life, and they have for decades pooping once a week. And they're like cool with it on some level. You would never know. So I hope that this episode lands well, because I do fear that we're going to get some persnickety comment down below in the YouTube video. And I hope that what we're trying to articulate is coming through. It's not to say, oh, it's all in your head, you big old kook. Just ignore your symptoms and live your life and like, you're fine. It's not that vibe. But the point that we're trying to share is that very often we see people get in their own way. Yes. And it's not always as much of like a diagnosable organic issue, so much as it is how we relate to our body, how we relate to these symptoms, how we relate to our food, and how everything is connected. And a lot of that ends up stemming back to the vagus nerve on some level and that gut-brain connection. But yeah, I hope that the tone was apparent throughout this episode.
Yeah, and I think too, I know you've talked about this at times. You had that time where you thought you had real yogurt and it was actually coconut yogurt. And where you were like, oh my gosh, I'm bloated. You saw your belly bloat because you thought you ate real yogurt, and in reality it was coconut yogurt. And like the instant you realized it was coconut yogurt, all the symptoms went away.
Yes.
And it just shows you how powerful the brain is. And I think, again, from my standpoint too, I empathize with the hooking in to some of this stuff, because again, it was definitely a big problem for me. And I think I would have been really defensive throughout time if people were like, oh, maybe we need to work on some mindset stuff. And again, there were definitely things I needed to address from a microbial standpoint. And there's things, again, to be worked on that were really important in helping me get better. But the mindset piece is going to be a big component for anything. And how you view recovery. can set you up for success or can set you up for failure in some way. And failure is a little bit of an intense word, but can set you up for some big roadblocks that might be really hard to overcome. And so I think you can have compassion for yourself as you move through this process, because it is really hard when your brain is very triggered by symptoms. And again, it can make recovery harder. And so working through some of the mindset hangups that come up, I do think it is really valuable in trying to understand where your headspace is at in terms of how you look at recovery and what the end goal really is. And even if it's just changing how you're viewing, I'm viewing symptoms as being the end point instead of, I want to be able to play tennis 3 times a week and or have energy to play with my kids, or be able to go out to restaurants more with my friends. All these things are very fulfilling and make your life inherently better. And so even that small shift, I think, is really valuable to consider and just to keep in mind when you're moving through this process.
And I even have another small one to go along with that. I would examine the use of words like symptom, flare, and reaction, and try to refrain or distance yourself from those words. Because honestly, I've known people where, I swear to God, just saying the word flare pulls them deeper into the flare.
Right.
And it's such a triggery word. And I think even symptoms or like a reaction, I talk about this all the time in the Q&As on FODMAP Freedom. Like if you ate some oatmeal or some yogurt or some avocado and it didn't go as planned, maybe we need to come up with a different term, because everybody goes to, well, I reacted to it. I had a reaction. And then that just doesn't paint a good picture.
Right.
And it's so triggery. Earlier in the episode, you said the word blip. And I like that word for a lot of this. Like, it was just a blip on the radar. No big deal. It was like a nothing burger. It was whatever.
It was like the bird on the radar. Where you're like,
yeah,
is that
like,
something
okay, whatever.
for? You're right. Right.
And, I have one more story I want to squeeze in here, but I didn't know where else to place it in the episode. So I guess it's just going to be in this weird little miscellaneous section right now. Going back to the idea that everybody is going to have, dare I say, symptoms or blips from time to time. Maybe TMI, but regardless of what my gut is doing on the regular, I have known for a long time that I get a bit more constipated the 2 days before my period. Mm-hmm. It just, I don't know, like my wiring, my motility slows down for the couple days. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I just know, that's just a thing. And my body's kind of going through some stuff right now, hormonally and whatnot. And I'm gearing up. It is what it is. And similarly, another one I wanted to share is going back to the idea of some foods just being a bit gassy, or maybe over-consuming food or over-consuming something that you're not used to eating, and that could elicit a response. There we go. Response could be a good word instead of reaction. Yeah. Similarly, FODMAPs, the way that they work, I know everybody talks about FODMAPs feeding the SIBO, but the way that FODMAPs seem to elicit a response in the human body that's pretty well established from Monash and their research is that they are osmotic laxatives, and they draw water into the bowel in a dose-dependent manner. And then if enough water is drawn into the bowel, that can cause some distension, and then that can cause some like sensitivity and pain and bloating and stuff. But going back to that idea of dose responsiveness, I had an incident maybe a couple months ago where, and I think I told you this. So I bought one of those bags of avocados at Costco, which meant that we then had 7 avocados that all ripened at the same time. And everybody knows the rule with avocados. They ripen for like a nanosecond and you have to use them. And if you wait even a day, they're going to be rotten. So we had 7 avocados that I had to use right then and there. So I made a giant batch of guacamole, and it was awesome. It's a great problem to have too much guacamole, but my daughter didn't want any of it. So then it was just me and my husband eating 7 avocados worth of guacamole. And, we're like pounding through it, and we're eating that in addition to whatever he made for dinner that night. I ended up giving a container of the guacamole to our neighbors, but I personally probably ate 3 avocados worth of guacamole that night. Hashtag no regrets. But the thing about it is, so I ate all that guacamole and the corresponding chips. And then I had some other food for dinner, I'm sure. And then later that night, when we were watching a movie, I realized, I was like, oh, I'm pretty bloated and I have like a bit of kind of crampiness going on. But I didn't think anything of it. I just laughed and was like, well, you did just eat like a month's worth of guacamole all in one sitting. That was probably a bit much all at once. And I just, I think I might have made some ginger tea or something, or chamomile tea, and just shrugged it off. And I wrote it out. I enjoyed the movie. And by the time the movie was over, it was a little bit better. By the time I went to bed and woke up the next morning, I was back to normal and it was fine. But it could have been much different had I had a coconut yogurt catastrophe-esque situation where, I go to like, oh my God, I've had the SIBO and I knew avocado was bad. I'm having a reaction. Oh my God. It could have been a much different scenario if I latched onto that more aggressively. But instead, I just said, that's interesting. And I laughed at the absurdity of eating all those avocados in one sitting. And then I just enjoyed the movie anyway.
Yeah. And I think, again, we're not immune completely of getting pulled into doubts or fears. And I think, again, sometimes the earlier in the process that you can label it, oh, I'm getting sucked in or pulled into fear, and I need to kind of move through it a little bit better. But yeah, I think we have both been through this process of where we needed to probably make some mindset changes to move forward. Maybe might have been a little bit more extreme than you, just because I tend to be a little bit more anxious OCD in sort of my patterns of thinking. So yeah, it's so interesting. The mindset piece, I know we've talked about it a bunch. It's just so make or break with some of these things. And I don't think it can be underestimated. And I do think you're right. We have to be somewhat careful when we talk about it with clients, because people tend to get aggressive sometimes if you talk about mindset, because
defensive.
Yeah, because they fear, we're basically saying like, well, it's just your stress, or I think the fear is that we're dismissing things, but in reality, what we're really doing is trying to ensure that you understand how important the mindset piece of the equation is. It's not negating your symptoms or any of the pain and discomfort that you're in, but it's more so focused on how your mindset can be a real important part of the process in getting better. And again, we've definitely seen it with clients.
Time and time again.
Time and time again. Again, and I would say most of the clients we work with probably come with mindset issues or some limiting beliefs or things that they need to work on. And some clients might more easily jump out of the limiting beliefs and get into a good mindset fairly quickly. And others might need more help in that regard. But I think, since this is the New Year's episode, I'm glad we're talking about some mindset changes and just how you're reviewing like big picture things. Because again, I think mindset can sometimes get lost in the sauce with what herb are you taking, or, what thing are you removing from your diet, or like what stress management strategy. Like it gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times. And it's really important to zoom out and just be like, how is my mindset and how is it affecting my recovery? Yeah. What do you believe is true about your current situation? What do you believe recovery is? Do you need to kind of adjust that in any way and tweak it, like tweak some of your goals? And I think it's a good time to do that going into the new year. New year, new you.
That's right.
Right. Ooh,
Will
and
be
the
fabulous.
hair flip from Nikki.
Yes, you missed it if you're not watching on YouTube right now. But yeah, I think I have two thoughts to wrap this one up, and that is, yeah, I mean, whether it's laughable or inspiring or somewhere in between, it is a clean slate on some level. A lot of us feel like it's a clean slate. We're making resolutions, we're making plans, we have aspirations for the new year. We're in, the season of wintering and kind of hunkering down, and now we're starting to gear up to hit some new stride in our lives. And I hope that this new year really is a new you in whatever way you need it to be. But also, I think to wrap us up here, healing is not just the absence of symptoms. Keep that in mind as you navigate this journey, whatever it looks like for you. And hopefully we will keep bringing the truth bombs and the tea and everything in between on the IBS Freedom podcast. And I will look forward to another year of podcasting with one of my best friends in the whole wide world.
Yes.
I'm lucky I get to do this.
We love you.
Mwah. Right back at you, Amy. All right, guys, we will see you in the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. Happy New Year.